Hey, everybody. It is August 21st, 2024. Here, again, I'm based in Boulder, Colorado. So happy to have you on today. And this is week two of the fall 2024 DroneSense basic training course. Today, I'm going to be talking about crime scene reconstruction and documentation, of course, focused on UAS operations. This is really an area that is near and dear to my heart. Let me make sure I'm unmuted. Zoom is telling me I was muted, and I don't think I'm muted. All right, let's see here. There we go. Perfect. All right, you should be able to see this. And I think in this case, I want to go ahead and start with an instructor biography. Again, David Spraggs. I retired after 26 years with the municipal police department here in Boulder, Colorado, retired as a detective sergeant. During that time, I was really involved in, a lot of different things, like so many of you are, wearing a lot of different hats. Did patrol investigations. I was a crime scene investigator for our agency for years, and I've always loved photography. It's been one of my passions. So back in 2005, I obtained my certification as an International Association for Identification forensic photographer. It's something I've taught for about 20 years as well. And I started our drone program back in 2016 and pretty immediately saw the benefit of adding aerial operations. And think about what we did before we had drones, right? My sheriff's office here in Colorado had a airplane, they had a Cessna, and they had a King Air, and we used to take that up with a Nikon film camera or digital SLR, and basically, use long lenses and capture scenes on the ground. We would get fire trucks and put the ladder up and go up to, 70, 80 feet, try to get that aerial view. And again, drones have just done so much for our ability to kind of move that forward and make the process that much simpler. And just checking the attendance list looks good. If anybody has any issues, again, I've got that chat up in my peripheral vision, so please let me know if you have any questions or issues. Okay, I've got to put this disclaimer in. Listen, this is a 1 hour presentation. We could teach and talk for days on this topic. This is going to be a high-level overview. I want to dig in and give it enough meat that you find it really useful and beneficial. That's my goal. I hope that you learn enough to kind of step away from this and say, hey, I'd like to investigate maybe Pix4D or these kind of mapping missions more thoroughly, or look at the hardware that we're using and select a camera that has better quality or something like that. But again, as I stated, due to the complex and varied nature of forensic work, it is essential to seek additional specialized training and education to ensure comprehensive knowledge and competency in the field. And that would be, again, my disclaimer today. In no way should you expect to leave this subject matter experts. And I guarantee there are folks on this call that are certainly as knowledgeable as I. And so, again, if you have points, please go ahead and drop that into the chat or ask a question. Okay, so the agenda, we're going to start with, I always start with the why. Why do we document visual evidence? We're going to talk about software and hardware considerations. We're going to talk about the basics of crime scene, crash scene photography. And then I'm going to give an introduction to flight planning in the DroneSense application, as well as a sample scene that I ended up mapping. And then I'm going to hop into Pix4D Mapper and kind of show you the process. I just did a short video running you through kind of the final output options and what that looks like after about 20 to 25 minutes of drone flights as well. And then finally, we're going to have a question and answer period. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Again, as we talk about forensic photography or forensic imaging or imagery, forensic is belonging to the courts of justice. Photography is the process or technique of creating images on light-sensitive material. In this day and age, we're living, again, in a digital world. Our drones are all flying CMOS or CCD digital sensors. Kind of the days of film are long past. But again, that is the light sensitive material. It would be the imaging sensor that we're using in our platform. So forensic photography is using photographic images to detect, record, interpret, and present evidence in legal or public proceedings. And I just want to reiterate this again, because again, this is the why. Why are we doing this? We are capturing or documenting this documentary evidence. Again, it's generally introduced into court as demonstrative evidence, this documentary evidence, to provide a visual record that can be used at a later date. And it really is kind of an awesome responsibility if you think about it, is that scene exists as it did on that day, just one time, that slice in time when you have the opportunity and the obligation to document the scene to the best of your ability. Again, why? We know this, a photograph or a video is worth 1,000 words. Digital or video evidence, still photographs, are very compelling in a court of law. That again, having been sitting through so many jury proceedings throughout my career and having the opportunity to speak with a jury afterward, I mean, the jury really wants to see that visual evidence, and we can really offer some pretty incredible forms of visual evidence that we couldn't not that many years ago. So as we get into the nuts and the bolts here, hardware considerations, and this is where I think there's a lot of misinformation and folks just don't necessarily understand what we're using here as well, is I wanted to give this visual representation about the physical size. This is obviously relative of the imaging sensor, whether it's CMOS or CCD technology, in various, this is not drone specific, this is actually for cameras here. But if you take a look at the kind of the full frame 35 millimeter, for those of you that are old enough like myself to have shot your crime scenes back in the day with 35 millimeter film, you had a roll of 12, 24, or 36 exposures to a specific ISO or ASA light sensitivity, 100, 200, 400, 800, maybe 1600 if you were shooting a low light scene at night. Maybe you were pushing that up to 3200 and doing different development techniques. But again, look at how large relatively that imaging sensor is on 35 millimeter film, and then take a look. So for example, let's start at the 1-inch sensor, right? That 1-inch sensor, that was a big deal back in the day. And on my desk behind me, you can see my trusty Phantom 4 Pro that I bought back in 2017 that I was so proud of. I still fly it today. It's still a great drone. And that is still a great imaging sensor. That is a 1-inch, that's the physical diagonal dimensions of that sensor in the Phantom 4 Pro is a 1-inch sensor. And that was a big deal. That was considered a very large sensor for its time. Now, as we go up in size, the next major size that's used in drone operations or drone hardware would be the 4/3, also called micro 4/3. And then we come into these kind of like 1.5, 1.6 crop, the APS-C sensors for Canon and Nikon. And I'm not aware that those are currently being used in the UAS environment. So why is this important? So as we come over to the left side of this image, we talk about resolution. Well, this is a 40 megapixel or 50 megapixel sensor versus 12 or versus 20. And there's a lot more than spatial resolution. Spatial resolution is just one part of the puzzle, as I stated. And it's interesting as you kind of dig into what that means is the smaller the pixel. So we're going to go to the stats on a Mavic 3 thermal here in just a minute. And that is one of my favorite drones. I'm not picking on that drone in any way, shape, or form. It is a phenomenal platform. It is a very high resolution sensor. And when I say resolution, I mean spatial resolution, the number of pixels horizontally versus the number of pixels vertically, and then multiply that for the total megapixel count. I believe it's a 48 megapixel sensor, but it's also a very small sensor. And what that means is the pixel pitch or the individual pixel size is very, very small. And that means they're like literally microscopic lenses. Each one of the pixels on a sensor has a glass coating, and it really is collecting light just like a lens. The lens is focusing on that imaging sensor, and then each one of those pixels has to collect the light. The smaller they are, the smaller the bucket, the less light it can collect. And that does lead to increased problems with the sensor in terms of moire and color aliasing and all of these things they talk about in the photographic realm. And again, I don't want to get too far down. I'm going to give you a real world example here in just a minute, but we want to talk about dynamic range. Generally, the larger the sensor, the larger the dynamic range. And that literally is the number of stops between dark and light that sensor can accurately recreate. So the file format, most of us, 99.5% of us probably are capturing our images, our evidentiary images in a lossy compression format called JPEG, and that's the Joint Photographic a photographic experts group. So again, JPEG is a lossy compression. It is absolutely accepted in court. It is a standard that is the worldwide standard. Just be aware of things like generational loss. So if you open a JPEG and then you resave the JPEG as a JPEG and you continue to do that, you're literally photocopying a photocopy, and that quality is going to degrade over time. So I do recommend to have, like, the best evidence rule is have your master images. If you're going to have a working copy, go ahead and have the working copy. You can do whatever you want to it. Resave it. Maybe you resave it as a TIFF or even another file format that is lossless or non-compression. But just make sure that you're leaving those master JPEGs alone. You can open and close them essentially an infinite number of times, but any changes that you make to them, if you're in Photoshop, you're changing the curves, the histogram, the levels, any of that, and resave it as a JPEG, you will experience that lossy compression, that generational loss. So TIFF, again, is tagged image file format, fantastic file format, much, much larger images. They're very good though. And then RAW is essentially the raw digital negative, where you have an enormous amount of processing latitude in how you choose to do that. So a drone like the Mavic 3 Thermal, it is just shooting in RAW. Something like the Mavic 3 Enterprise that really is designed more for mapping and things like that for data capture. It does allow you to capture in those other various file formats directly. Another important thing very quickly is the shutter. So we talk about a global shutter versus a rolling shutter. And the global shutter is really what you want if you can do it for flying survey and orbit missions, for developing input for a software like Pix4D Mapper. If you want to create a two-dimensional or three-dimensional data set, if you can use a camera like an M3E, enable the mechanical shutter. So that mechanical shutter is literally, as it takes a photograph, the shutter is opening and closing across the entire sensor array. A rolling shutter is a readout generally from the top to the bottom of the sensor that is happening in, a millisecond, a very short time frame, but it can induce some, as the drone is moving, it can induce some motion blur and some weird artifacting where a software like Pix4D has a difficult time creating what are called automatic tie points. Okay, so zoom, digital versus optical, and I'm going to give you an example of that. We got to try to make this a little bit real world here. Just don't, I want you to see some visuals here today as well. So let's go through it again. We're focusing on the DJI Mavic 3 series just because it's one of the most widely used drones in public safety. It's a phenomenal, both of them, the E and the T edition, are just phenomenal platforms. So let's take a look at the specs. So I'm looking here on my screen. The wide camera of the Mavic 3 Enterprise is that micro 4/3 or the 4/3. And I'm going to come back to this slide. So that is the lighter green. It is much, much larger than the 1-inch sensor found in the Phantom 4 Pro. So that is a very large sensor. Take a look at the wide sensor in the Mavic 3 Thermal. That is a 1/2-inch CMOS. So as we come up here, that's actually going to be between the 1/1.7 and the 1/2.5. It's going to be right in there. It's about a quarter size spatially of a 1-inch sensor used in the Phantom 4. So again, it's a much newer sensor, probably has better signal to noise characteristics, things like that. But remember what I talked about is the smaller the pixel, the less light it's able to gather. So take a look at the Mavic 3 Thermal is a 1/2-inch sensor, which is very small, but it's mated to a high resolution at 48. We could do the math to come up with it would be, I guess, the micro, I think in microns is how they measure that, of how large each pixel is, but it's very small. Okay, so we talk about the field of view, the aperture, everything that we're used to in terrestrial imaging. So there are the four things that control basically the exposure of your imaging sensor is the ambient light, the shutter speed, the f-stop or aperture, and then the ISO or International Standards Organization. That is the ASA ISO from the film world that they have brought into digital imaging sensors as well. So those four things control the exposure. So all of these have specifications, again, of minimum versus maximum aperture. As that f-stop number gets bigger, the field of view and apparent sharpness can increase, but it's gathering much less light. And I'm going to give you an example of that here in just a minute. Let's take a look at the telephoto camera here on the M3E, M3T. It's interesting. The T and the E use the same sensor. Again, this is a half-inch CMOS again, and it is 12 megapixels. Absolutely ample resolution. I have no issues with that at all. It's a really good imaging system. Very happy with it overall. But take a look at the ISO range. This is interesting. The 3E is only going to 6,400 ISO on the upper end, which is very high for those of us that come from the film world. But look at the specifications of the ISO on the T. They're actually bumping that two more stops, which would be the 12,000 midpoint, then up to 25,600. So technically, that telephoto lens on the T, with everything else being equal, ambient light, field of view, I'm sorry, ambient light, aperture, and shutter speed, that it actually can gather 4 times the amount of light, because every time that you half or double any of the specifications, it is the inverse square law. So it is quadrupling the amount of light, basically. So you do one stop, it's actually doubling. If you do 2 stops, it's quadrupling. 3 stops is a factor of 16. All right, I'm going down the rabbit hole, you guys. I got to refocus here. I get a little excited about this, if you can't tell. All right, I see, just check in here, 20 minutes in. No questions, nothing in the chat. The chat is open, so please hop in. I see Alex Armstrong, our Senior Learning and Development Specialist, is on the call as well. Alex, welcome. All right, this is something that I find really interesting, and I'm going to be completely honest. I actually really misunderstood the specifications of the Mavic 3 thermal that I fly all the time. So you notice, those that fly the M3T and also the Matrice 30 as well, that there's a part in the zoom range on the 3T between about 1 up to 7x where the quality is significantly degrading before it switches over to the optical, to the telephoto system, which is an optical telephoto. However, this is a really important number. Take a look, the digital zoom. They say it is overall the entire system between the wide to the telephoto. It is a 56x zoom range, but that is pure digital zoom. So on the wide angle sensor, you're covering 1 to 6.99% zoom, and then it pops over to optical on the telephoto lens at 7x, and then it's digital on up to 56. So we're going to give an example. Again, we're talking real world. All right. So what you're looking at, I tried to get creative. I have these photographic resolution targets, and frankly, they were just too small. So what you're looking at is a ground control target that is 2 feet by 2 feet. And there we go. Cliff's asking, so you only really have 2 focal lengths that are not digital. That is absolutely correct. Yes, the 1x on the Mavic 3 thermal there's no digital zoom, and then it's digital zoom all the way up when it switches over very abruptly to the optical telephoto lens, and then from there it switches to digital on up the range. That is correct. There's 2 steps where it is optical only. And that is something that I did not understand. And we're going to see, again, the example of that momentarily. So the drone right here, this is the M3T hovering at a fixed 50 AGL, 50 feet AGL. You can see my 3-foot Hoodman landing pad. Again, you've got a 2x2 ground control target, and I kind of got creative. I had DroneSense buy me basically a smaller version of the eye chart that we all read at our ophthalmologist or doctor's office. I'm like, well, what's kind of something that we could use that would help show resolution, but doesn't get down to the lines per inch or lines per millimeter type scenario. So this is what we've got. Okay. So what you're looking at, again, this is full frame, 50 feet, full frame, 1x. This is it. Now, the 2 images on the right are, for those of you that work in Photoshop, this is the image size. Now, look, the top one says, this is kind of crazy. The dimension is 3, let's see, M3T zoom. Okay. So that's interesting because I might have captured the wrong thing. So yeah, we're on the zoom lens here. So that is a 4,000 by 3,000, 12 megapixel. The top image is also dimensions 4,000 by 3,000. It is 55 inches by 41 at a 72 pixel per inch resolution. That is the resolution that our computer monitors display images at, 72 pixels per inch. That's why everything for the web defaults at 72 pixels per inch. Now, what I did is I unchecked resample and I put the resolution to 300. That is 300 pixels per inch. That is the standard, considered the standard resolution to create a high quality print of a digital photograph. You really want to be at 300 pixels per inch. What you see is that comes down to a height of 10 versus width of 13. So you're going to be able to output a 10 by 13 image here. Okay, now we're going to zoom in. So here it is. We have, this is, sorry, I've got this blocking my screen. Okay, this is 1x at 100%. So in Photoshop, I basically zoomed in. So it was displaying at the full resolution at 72 pixels per inch. So this is that image zoomed in from 50, click to 66.7 to 100. This is a 100% display, which is the maximum quality that can be displayed. If we clicked past that to 200, the quality is going to fall apart. It just gets pixelated. Okay, so let's take a look here. We're going to come back and we go, here we go. So there's the 1x. There's 2x at 100%. Now, I don't know how it looks on your side. Look, I can read the E, looks like an FP, maybe Tom Ocean Zebra, maybe Lincoln Paul. Edward, I'm not seeing maybe the first two or three, four lines. It looks pretty clean. I can start to see a little bit of artifacting. It's looking a little bit kind of artificial, this kind of whitewash look. Now, as we zoom into 4x, remember, this is a Mavic 3 thermal hovering 50 feet AGL. These are 2-foot targets on the ground at 2x2. So at 4x, it's really starting to fall apart. This is zoomed into 100%. So I see, I can certainly read the E, the F, the P, the TOZ, maybe Lincoln. I don't know if that's a Paul or Lincoln, Paul, or Frank, whatever it is. It doesn't look great. So that's 4x. Now look, here is 6x. It's holding together kind of, but highly visible digital artifacts. I mean, the quality here is not looking good to me at all. Like, the point of this is, would I ever use this zoom range to capture evidentiary video or photography? The answer is no, I would not. Now, this is the wow moment. Take a look as I click into the 7x right there. Remember, we at 6x and up to 6.99x are cropping, digitally cropping into that sensor on the wide angle sensor. At 7x, now we are optical again on the telephoto optical path, the telephoto lens, the telephoto sensor, lower resolution, but we're optical, so we have no cropping at this point. Looks phenomenal. That's 100% display at 7x. We're going to zoom in to 11x. Actually, I think it looks surprisingly good. I think it looks very clean, very clear at 11x, even though we're digitally cropping that sensor. Look, of course, I had to give a shout out to our buddies at NIST. We have the standard test methods, response, robotic capabilities. I can read that sign very clearly. Again, 11x, Mavic 3 thermal, 50 feet AGL. Okay, 18x. It's starting to break apart. We're starting to see some digital noise, some artifacting, some odd colors. But overall, really not bad. I mean, to me, this is fairly usable. And, I should have measured the height of each of those lines, but you can clearly read through line 10. Again, M3T 50 feet AGL. I'm actually surprised at how well the 18X held together. Here we've got 30X. Again, holding together fairly well. Line 10 is somewhat legible. Line 11 is not bad. We can still read the NIST marker as well. And then we come into 40X, and obviously we're in heavily digitally modified. We are cropped into a very small image size on this small sensor to begin with. Image quality is not good. And then there's the full 56x digital zoom. I've got to give it credit. You can still read that at 50 feet AGL. I mean, there may be some benefit there, but again, in terms of zooming in really past, let me give that to you again. So 6x, we come to 7, here 11, 18, 30. It's starting to fall apart. Now, one of the tenets that I talk about, the tenets that is so critical is first do no harm. So I'm going to give you an example of that here in just a minute. Hope you found this useful. I kind of had a fun time putting this together. I really wasn't sure kind of on the performance here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you what not to do. This is a video, and let me mute it to stand by. Okay. So this is last week as I was preparing for the webinar. I'm like, all right, because we used to run into this all the time. We would say, well, we want to have a balance of image quality. We want to fill the frame with the evidence in question if we want to do the mid-range or close-up photographs. And so what I'm doing here, this is the Matrice 30. So I'm flying the M30T. This is a mock crime scene. Luckily, it was still summertime when I did this. School was not in session. This is at a nearby middle school. So I think I started at 100 feet AGL, and the gimbal's at 90 degrees, kind of a nadir pattern straight down. So I'm coming down. I'm in my Birkenstocks. You guys are welcome. I live in Colorado. Here, I've got a cell phone covering from the ground view because I had these whole videos put together of different drones at different AGLs and the apparent effect of some common types of evidence on the ground that we may be documenting. I actually chose not to share all that with you. There was just too much variability. But take a look at this video. This is the M3. The M3 is down below 50 feet. That's probably 40 feet. Take a look. So some of the medical evidence. So there we go. Did you see that? So the medical gauze blew. That drone was at about 25 to 30 feet, Matrice 30T. Now, by no means am I telling you that is a safe altitude to capture a crime scene at. It is not. And I'm just bringing it down to see what happens. Here there are 10 shell casings, a mixture of, I think, 45 and 223. We have the standard evidence markers, and then I have the ABFO scales, those bite mark scales on a 9mm. I'm sorry, I think it's a 45, and then the 223. And then you can see everything just blowing away. I'm going to tell you the drone's at about 15 feet right now when this started to happen. But again, remember, I am in a hover and I'm actually coming down. There is less power to the motors in the ESC. Those props are spinning more slowly. As I started to basically go up again, and as you pitched forward and that energy was pushing out, I mean, everything on the ground just exploded. So this is the point, is be cautious and use that zoom judiciously. Listen, I think at 50 feet or a little bit higher is probably safe for the vast majority of ground-based evidence we're going to be capturing. And I really like the idea of keeping that AGL high. You do not want there to be a possibility that we're blowing or moving that physical evidence with the prop wash. The 7X looks beautiful. It's a lower resolution sensor, but it's clean, it's clear, and I think that's just a kind of a good way to go. Okay, here we go. So halfway mark, check in, questions, reality check. Anything you guys want to add? Let me know. I'm trying to watch the chat here as well. All right, let's move through that. We've got a lot to cover. This is the hardest part of today, is trying to keep this at an hour. So I've got to stay on point and move forward. All right, the basics of UAS imagery capture. Listen, as I taught forensic photography all those years, and I really mean this, when you go to a scene, whether you're documenting with a camera terrestrially or launching a drone to capture evidence from an aerial perspective, is just take a moment and think about the purpose and the scope and the reason for what you're doing. Remember, those images aren't for us. I mean, of course, your investigators may be reviewing them, your criminalists may be reviewing them, but think about down the chain in the criminal justice system. You have got prosecutors, you have defense attorneys, jurors, judge, and the more professional and the better your output quality, the harder it is for a defense attorney to question the veracity or the work that you're doing on this front. So just take that really seriously. So these are some of my basics here is, again, we talk about what is the purpose. You understand the importance of what you're doing. You're in that mindset to critically think about the best way to capture the evidence so it can educate a juror or a judge down the road of what happened. This is demonstrative evidence. So slow and methodical, I really believe in that. My team used to come back from documenting scenes, and frankly, they just flew too fast. There wasn't enough footage. So I really say more is better than less. And listen, in the film world, you had 24, maybe 36 exposures, and you had to put in another roll of film. We really thought in terms of 12, 24, 36 exposures. Now, I'm not advocating blindly taking 1,000 photographs for no reason. Be thoughtful and careful in your approach. But listen, we have, right? I've got a 200, I wanted to bring it down for this. This is a 256 gigabyte micro SD card that I think I bought on Amazon for $22. You know, my first Type 2 compact flash card for my first Nikon D1 digital camera, that was 1 gigabyte. It was $600. We have a lot of storage. Storage is cheap. So don't be stingy. Capture what you need and maybe a little bit more. But again, have a purpose and a reason. Okay. Tell a story. This is something that I can't stress enough. What we used to see in crime scene photography a lot is my officers or criminalists would go out on whatever kind of case. Let's say it involved a gun, an outdoor scene where a gun was left behind or a shell casing. I would have these great overall photographs of the scene. And then all of a sudden I would be flipping, I'm aging myself, flipping through the printed or maybe on a computer monitor looking at this. And all of a sudden there's a close-up of a gun or a shell casing or a knife or whatever it was. And like, well, where was that, right? Those are the mid-range relationship photos. So we want to start wide and then work our way in. And then again, I say mid-range relationship photos. And I still think that holds true in the UAS world as well. So video capture, slow, smooth, orbit, and then descend. Now, I'm going to show you an example. This scene that I did a mock scene. I'm like, hey, I haven't done this in a few years. I'm going to fly it. You guys, it's not pretty, but I'm going to show you what I did. And I'm sure all of you could do better than I. This is the takeaway. Go slower than you think you should go. Even I, like 90 seconds into the video, I'm like, man, this is taking too long. I got to speed it up. And you can see when I did that. And then again, think about the mode that you have. We know our drones have normal mode, sport mode, and then depending on what iteration or version of DJI, you've got, what do they call it now? The used to be the tripod mode. What is it? The function mode, right? So we cannot change that in DroneSense right now, but in Pilot 2, depending on the model you're flying, that could be tripod mode or attitude mode. So tripod mode is great because it forces you to slow down, and I really do recommend exploring tripod mode as well. Okay, so this is something I want to give, again, like nuts and bolts, really functional things that you can take away from the class. So one of the things that is, oh, sorry, let me mute this. There we go. What I'm showing here is there's a piece of evidence under this particular car. So as you can see, let me pause the video right now. As you can see, the drone, I think it's, again, an M3E in this case, is at about 30 feet AGL, and I'm trying to capture the position of this item of evidence, but it's a mixed lighting scene. You've got bright light in the sunlight on that recycled asphalt, and then you have shadow. Okay, these sensors are averaging sensors. They're sensing the brightest and the darkest part of the scene, and it is compensating. What it doesn't want to do is it doesn't want to blow out your highlights. It doesn't want those lighter parts to be basically a 000 RGB value in the digital realm. So it's doing its best to say, I think this is the appropriate exposure. So again, in DroneSense, you can adjust the EV or exposure compensation. So let me show you that. So from the camera settings there, we're going to bump up that exposure compensation. It's also called EV. Both are correct. And take a look at that. There is a gun tucked under there that you can see. So even bringing it up one stop. So we have, I think, 1/3 increment adjustments. We can go plus or minus those full stops as well. And then I wanted to show you in the camera mode, we can go from automatic into manual and then adjusting the ISO up, right? Because doubling the ISO number is going to double the light. Quadrupling it is going to quadruple the light. And then the shutter speed as well. The longer the shutter speed, the more light is being gathered onto that imaging sensor. Now, the downside is we can blow this out as well. There's that sweet spot where the evidence comes into view, but take a look at the area that's in sun, totally blown out, but you're seeing what you wanted to see as that piece of evidence. All right, really short video. Again, that's great functionality. We use that all the time in forensic photography. The other thing too on ground is using a fill flash, but we're not putting flashes on. Although that's an interesting thought. You could certainly fly a GL10 on during the daytime to get that spotlight effect as well. Okay, one thing I want to talk just a little bit about low light as well. And I need to mute this. Actually, I did this morning at about 5 a.m. here in Colorado. I thought I should really have an example of this, just talking about it. We're back in the camera mode manual. And again, I wanted to show you we have the shutter speed. Now, remember, the camera was in automatic mode, which means it had actually adjusted to the best of its ability to get the maximum light gathering capability. So it was already bumped up to 25,600, 1/30th of a second on that frame, shutter speed as well. So again, the automatic mode is generally going to do just as good as you can do in manual, but know that you can do fine tuning by going back into that manual mode and adjusting whatever parameters are available, generally the ISO and the shutter speed. Okay, so this is the documentation example I did. This is going to be kind of for the rest of our presentation today. This is a mock bike v car accident with a fatality. Unfortunately, it was a child in this case that was deceased at the scene. One of the things I like to do is I like, again, an overall photo, but this is a relationship photo. This is where am I on the world, right? And so I want to show you this shot right here. Like this shot is great. This shows a middle school here in Colorado. You can see the lake in the background. The scene in this case is that lone car above the school, in between the lake and the school. That's going to be where the crime scene is located in this case. But take a look from this scene or this photograph. This is pulled back where I chose to include the nearest major intersection. And I really like having that intersection relationship for these outdoor. And I've even hovered a drone at 6 or 7, 8 feet and literally captured down a block, capturing the street signs, right? If I'm going to fly through or do whatever I'm going to do as a video overview, I love to start at those intersections, get the street sign. It's locking the location into place. It lets people understand where this is happening. And as we go through, I think about taking these overall photographs, again, methodical, consistent at 45s and at 90s. So this is that 45-degree view looking, it would be, let's southeast. Now we're looking directly east down the parking lot. That's showing kind of the ingress, how you would drive into this parking lot at the middle school. We've got the 45-degree now coming back the other way. We've now got that 90 looking to the west, 45, and then on 90 looking north. You're just getting that overall idea, like there's a purpose. It's just showing it from a different visual perspective so you can see where people may have been coming from or driving from. Because remember, the prosecutor, they may use all of these at opening remarks, at closing, like all of this material is so important to give them what works for them. All right, now what I would generally do on an outdoor scene is I really like this series of oblique images. So the oblique is that camera sensor, I'm sorry, the gimbal. I think this is about 45 degrees, whatever it is, 30 to 45 degrees. You know, the gimbal is looking out the horizons in the view. That's totally appropriate. But at some point, we want to get basically directly over the scene. And here I'm going to start higher. And again, you can use a combination of reduced AGL with zoom, being cognizant of the quality of the optical zoom system or the zoom system that you're using. And then we're going to go ahead and bring it down. So I think this is a little bit higher. This is the M3T, I think around 150 AGL. And I'm coming down in about 20 or 30-foot increments and just reshooting the same photograph over and over, right? You're getting more detail, you're getting more resolution. There's just no reason not to capture this many photographs, again, because you just don't know what may be useful. And in this scenario, that person was doing donuts, let's say, and the young child on the bike rode up, the accident occurred. Look, we want to capture here. If we're down here, well, we're not seeing everything happening out here with the marks, the donut marks here. So again, think high, come down. We want to be very methodical as well. Okay. Now, I want to show you something. This is always a point of contention. Now, I chose, again, this is my vehicle. This is the 2D dummy, the little boy, that's my son's bike. Like, this is all staged. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to opt. I put my Hoodman pad. I've got the case for the M3 there, and there's this kind of thought that you shouldn't have anything added into the crime scene photos. You don't want patrol cars. You don't want personnel. I do agree with personnel. You want to do your best to keep personnel out of the scene. Patrol cars, though, are a different story, or anything, or evidence tape. I'm sorry, evidence tape, anything like that, or a crime scene barrier tape. This is my opinion. When I was a detective and I showed up on a scene, I would leave everything exactly where it was. I wanted to capture and memorialize the scene in the exact condition it was in when I got there. There were other detectives that were like, hey, let's move this patrol car back another 50 feet or 100 feet, whatever it is. No, I left everything in position. So again, to me, having the landing pad in the scene, it's easily explainable. It's a reasonable distance away that I visually inspected the ground. Now, it is interesting. I'm seeing this now for the first time. Take a look. Take a look at the skid marks. The landing pad is directly on a skid mark. That is not associated with this at all. But again, we couldn't say that. And, we're not going to do a one-to-one where we're going to be able to get a true representation, at least at this altitude, of the quality or impression patent kind of skid mark. Anyway, just be aware of that. I mean, come up with what is the right decision for your agencies. But again, start high, come low. Okay, this is in the video here. Let's just tear it apart. So the drone is, I don't know, 150 feet here. And, I'm going to start that nice gentle orbit. Again, keeping the area of interest generally in the center of the frame, completely appropriate. This is good. And, this is what I do. I'm filming this and I'm thinking, this is the video that's going to be playing in the background as the prosecutor is talking about the closing remarks or opening remarks or whatever it is, right? Just this lengthy video. Now, if you notice, my 3T was having some focusing issues here. It glitches out a few times, which I found in there. Did you see that? So I've actually never noticed that behavior before. I'm not sure what happened. But again, I'm doing that full 360, and then you'll see I'm going to bring it a little bit lower and a little bit closer in as well. And this looks fine. I think this is an appropriate speed. Maybe a little bit slower would be good. That gimbal angle is coming down. The AGL is dropping a little bit. Trying to have that kind of coordinated turn. I say think like a cinematographer. Now it's funny here. I'm kind of like, okay, and I'm speeding up. See, I'm coming down. That field of view is narrowing, but the drone speed is going faster. And that actually looks to me like it was going too fast. Now, I just had that kind of major focus issue, and I don't know if it was the contrast or what it was, but I just stopped and reset and then just continue back through that orbit. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and pick it up here. So again, that's just that kind of orbit overall. Certainly appropriate to do a nadir or kind of downward video as well. You can do a video fly through, whatever's appropriate for your particular scene. Okay, here we go. So everybody, no questions that I see so far. We've got 17 attendees hanging in there. I appreciate it. You'll all get your certificates for staying on this long. Now, we're going to hop into flight planning. We're going to have to pick it up a little bit here. So the flight planning in DroneSense is an incredible opportunity to capture data that is appropriate for a 2D or 3D deliverable. And what do I mean by that? So if we talk about two-dimensional, that's going to be an orthomosaic, which is that high resolution looking straight down photograph. Technically, it's not stitched. It's a much more advanced process of a combined point cloud, basically this combined data set. But again, that's looking straight down. You have the GeoTIFF and GeoPDF as file formats. Those of you that are familiar in DroneSense that have our advanced geospatial package, that can be added in. This is so cool that you can go do a special event, let's say get the casualty collection points, the points of egress, the medical tents, the start line, whatever it is, the parade route, and you can map that the night before, take that imagery layer and put that GeoTIFF or GeoPDF into DroneSense on the web, and also share that to the controller as well. So, and then we have this what's called nadir or nadir, which is the gimbal at 90 degrees. That would be a single pass or corridor type mapping mission. And then again, minimum, I recommend 80% front and side overlap. This will make more sense here in just a minute. So as we move on to a three-dimensional deliverable, what does that mean? Well, that means we're going to generate a densified point cloud with that vertical z-axis. The 2D, that's all you've got. You're looking straight down at the orthomosaic. Once we get into that three-dimensional deliverable, we now have the ability to capture the densified point cloud, which means we can measure in 3 dimensions within Pix4D Mapper or Pix4D Matic, whatever you're using. You also have textured mesh, which I'm going to show you here in just a minute, as well as the orthomosaic. So if you don't know what you need, I am an advocate of capture more data than you think you need because you're not losing anything if you only need a two-dimensional deliverable. Okay, the oblique is different. We want that gimbal to be angled to capture more of the vertical face of the surface. So I would say 60 to 75 degrees. What you don't want is you cannot have the horizon. We want it to be focused, and you generally want to fill the frame with your area of interest. Again, minimum 80% front, 80% side overlap. Now, the mission I'm going to show you here now is higher than that. I think I did 85, 85. You cannot have too much data for these types of missions. The takeaway is fly as low and slow as possible, and you've got to balance data collection with flight time, all of those factors. Finally, as an additional component of a three-dimensional output is I will often combine an oblique data set, which is the hundreds of photographs captured with the gimbal angle at, let's say, 70 degrees, and then also fly an orbit around that area of interest for that additional data set, and you can merge those point clouds or those data sets in Pix4D, Matic. I want to say Mapper, that's kind of the legacy system. Okay, you want a photo every 5 to 10 degrees and minimum 36 around a 360-degree orbit. Now, in DroneSense, you can do that, but I believe that we're taking a photograph every 2 or every 3 seconds. So you set that frequency by the speed and just fly it slow and get more and more photographs around that circle. All right, now, oh, this should have been muted. I apologize. Okay, now this is how I start because look, we want to do flight planning. I've got the drone in flight and I am putting that center point directly over my area of interest, the vehicle in this case. Look, in the white bounding box, I just put a marker. I just used the camera view. The gimbal was below 15 degrees. And look, that targeted search, I dropped it. Now, I had been experimenting earlier and I had moved the position. So the one I just deleted was from earlier. The reason this is so important is when you switch to map view, because remember, I have to enter flight planning in map view, is now with that marker on the ground directly over my item of evidence, I know exactly where to build my orbit mission and my other nadir or oblique missions as well. So what I'm doing is I'm coming into what we call the survey mission. And here we can do the kind of 2D output, the 2D corridor. We can do the three-dimensional as well. And this is a very long video. It's 28 minutes. We do not have time for this. So we're going to move through this really quick again, but I'm basically coming in. This is that adjustable polygon. You know, I'm setting this, I'm changing the parameters. Yeah, I've got to clean up this mission. I've got a lot of points here. This is one of my main training missions that I use with customers. So take a look, my altitude now. So I knew what I could safely fly this mission at. This is not a very large area. So I decided to fly this at 45 feet. Take a look at the flight path, how that just reduced. And then every white circle is a camera capture point. That's when the photographs are going to be taken. And then take a look, I'm bumping the front and side overlap to 85. Now I'm clicking 3D mode. That just enabled it to do the grid or the double pass. This is a necessity for a 3D deliverable through any of your 3D processing software like Pix4D Matic. So what that's going to do is obviously increase the flight time dramatically. As you scroll to the top of the flight planning bar, you can see how much flight time is left as well. So you can kind of tune. Now, I did this on purpose. Remember, the drone is still in flight. Look at my battery. I've got 63% battery. Right now, the survey time is saying 10 minutes here. But generally, I found it could be a little bit longer as well than the estimate that we give you, and I think that's common with other software suites as well. So we're going to go ahead and execute that flight plan, and I just push the play button. Remember, this is fully autonomous. That drone is going to go ahead and fly over to its starting point where I told it to start, and you literally just need to watch it. You watch the drone, you confirm that images are getting captured. Now, if you take a look at the inset video, you can see where every photo is getting captured because it appears to stop. It's just that quick kind of shutter, and you see that as well. And so we're going through this. Now, again, I'm not going to keep you here for the next 20 minutes to go through this. This is a real-time video. I didn't crop it because I wanted to show you a few things. So look, it's moving through. We're down to 53%. Let's keep going here. Okay, we're at 48. It's still on that first pass. 45, 36%. And now I'm thinking about, okay, this is a 2 battery mission. I knew it was going to be a 2 battery mission. It's still moving along, but take a look at what I do here. This is the great thing in our software now is I'm at 34%, and I'm going to stop the mission here momentarily. And what happens is when you stop a mission that is currently being executed, it's going to place a marker, an S icon. So that is the stop point. That's the resume point, and it's really easy to come back and resume. And right there, I just push stop. There is that precisely positioned now marker under me. I'm just going to fly the drone home. We're going to do a battery swap. I'm going to rejoin this flight plan and just have it start at that S, at that marker point. So I love this functionality, and we're going to come forward. So we're taking off again, and we're still in the mission. And there it is. There's the S. So I've selected that, and I'm right back in the flight plan. Okay. So I have got everybody 7 minutes. This is the first time I just put this class together. So this is the first time I've done this, and I'm going a little bit long. My apologies. So we're going to move through this. So I'm coming in and building the orbit mission. The cool thing, again, that marker on the ground, that targeted search tells me exactly where to put the orbit mission. So I'm going to do the orbit mission. So it's going to default to 150. I kind of settle on, let's see, what do I say? I settle on a 20-foot AGL. Now, I had the sensor really a little bit off here. I'm only capturing the front part of that car. It doesn't mean it's going to be a bad data set. What I should have done is gotten back into the map view and pulled that gimbal angle and used the map view with the marker to set the gimbal angle more precisely. I just arbitrarily left it at 45 degrees. So that's exactly what I do. I actually came in and flew a second set here. So I'm going to hop forward, everybody. So we have all of this information. So we're flying this again, capturing that data. I'm just flipping back and forth between views. And see, again, I could have centered that as well. Okay, what I want to do, I want to make sure I have enough time to capture the next component here as well. This is the Pix4D mapper demo. So we're going to bring all this together. So what I did is I took all the data sets, that oblique data set of, I think, 400 and something photographs. I took the 2 orbits that I had done and I combined it all into, and I did Pix4D Mapper. This is actually Pix4D Matic, and I need to update the slide. Again, I came up back in 2017-18 on Mapper. That's my norm, but I am using Pix4D Matic, and my thanks to the team at Pix4D for this. So what we're on is the 2-dimensional base layer. Each of those blue points is the uncalibrated camera. Now, I've already processed this, right? So I'm just taking through a quick video walkthrough of what this looks like. So here we're looking at the calibrated camera, and then the ground that you see are called automatic tie points. So it took about 3 or 4 hours to process this. Now, I'm really zoomed in to show you all the different camera views of how I brought that together. So it's important, though, there's a spot where I'm going to pause it here in just a moment, so you can see. Let me pull it forward right here. I want to show you the corridor here as well. Yeah, I'm going to pause it right there. It's a little bit hard to see. You can see the difference in the camera positions for the oblique camera. This was at 45 degrees, remember, to the orbit camera that was done at 20 degrees. Now, I can't zoom in right now, but see the great solid green right here. What I did is from 45 degrees, I came to the center point and I took a photograph about every 3 feet coming down to that 20-degree point where I started the orbit mission, because the 45-foot position and 20-foot position AGL have different ground sampling distances. So it's a lot harder for the software to mate or match those tie points on the ground. Way beyond the scope of the class. I'm not showing ground control targets here. I actually didn't have them delivered when I went out and flew this. There are ways to basically set common points or manual tie points in all of these, re-optimize, and then combine them in a better way. But again, let's go ahead and play through this because I want to see the outputs, and we've got about 4 minutes left. So this is interesting. If you take a look, so the calibrated cameras of the entire data set is 533 here as well. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn off all the cameras. What you're looking at now are just the tie points. I just turned on the densified point cloud, and then I just turned on nope, I don't have the mesh on yet. I turned off the tie points. This is the densified point cloud. Now I'm going to turn on the 3D textured mesh, and then I'm going to turn off the point cloud. And now you're going to see that apparent quality that is just so greatly increased as well. Now, remember, I can measure in 3 dimensions in this software very accurately. Beyond the scope of this class is talking about ground control points, absolute versus relative accuracy, scale constraints. There's a whole lot more to learn on this, but there are some ways to really do this and get extremely accurate results as well. Hey, Jonathan, great. Let's see. Yes, Jonathan, great question. Thanks for asking. Jonathan is asking about the RTK or real-time kinematics functionality. In the DJI software, if you have the RTK module and you are basically subscribing to a CORS a subscription, that you can basically get a direct RTK lock onto the drone position, kind of independently as the rover without a base station. It's using the radio network. There's different ways to do it. You can link it to a ground station or use the CORS network. But basically, yes, it is great functionality. That's going to give you that 1 centimeter precision. We did that a lot at my police department. And I want to be clear, at this point in time, DroneSense does not support the RTK functionality that is supported on the DJI side. It's something we may support in the future. So if that's something you'd want, please let us know. And okay, and thank you, Jonathan, for that. Let me come back. Oh, sorry, guys, let me play that again. I want to stop it here. I'm going to come forward. I want to show you. So we're looking at the 3D deliverables. This is that 3D textured mesh. Now, the cool thing is we subscribed, let me pause it here. We subscribed to a program. We used Sketchfab, and I could basically upload just the textured mesh to a private account that was password protected, and we could share that with other agencies, with our investigators, with our DA's office. So they had that 3D visual model without having to have the Pix4D software. Now we've switched into the 2-dimensional deliverable. Look on the top, we're back at 2D. This is now that ortho mosaic. So I've processed that high resolution ortho mosaic. So that's off. There it is, geo-rectified, overlaid on that base layer map. And then we're going to zoom in, and there really is an extraordinary level of detail in these ortho mosaics. It's a very large lossless file. This is not very sharp. You can actually apply sharpening algorithms, which I think it looks a little bit better. All right, well, that is it. I am right at the end of my time. Let's go ahead and scroll through. I want to give, hopefully I've given some ample time for questions. We're right at time. Any other questions, go ahead and drop it in the chat. Couple of things. This is really important, and I would so appreciate your honest feedback. For those on the call that know me, I've got fairly thick skin. I'd love to know your feedback, the good and the bad. We really want this to be beneficial and useful for customers, and you really drive us to deliver content that works for you. So if you would please scan the QR code, go ahead and review that basic training. It would mean a lot to me. And Jonathan, that sounds great. Yes, and you can do that. That's correct. And I think you posted that on the Facebook users group as well, that you can actually set it up for the RTK in DJI and then come on over and fly into DroneSense. So appreciate that information as well. Go ahead and scan the QR code again for basic training review would be helpful. And then I'll give a few more seconds. I think somebody had to drop. Stand by. And this is my contact information as well. So again, I'm David Spraggs from the DroneSense customer success team. We are just passionate about helping our customers and really wanting to deliver the functionality that you need to do your job. So you can reach out to me with questions, concerns, feature requests, ideas, anything at all. We're always happy to talk. So thank you so much for attending today. I really appreciate it. And everybody have a great day and stay safe. Thanks again.